That's how long the Veyron ran before it shut itself off. Matt would hit the key, hear the W16 wake up. All 16 cylinders, all 4 turbos. A sound that costs more than most people earn in a decade. And then silence. 2 seconds. Every time. 2 seconds is long enough to feel hope. Short enough to make it worse. And what happened inside those 2 seconds, what the car was actually doing and why, turned out to be a story that Bugatti probably hoped nobody would tell. Forget everything you think you know about how expensive cars break. People imagine hypercar failures as cinematic. Carbon fiber shattering at speed. Engines grenading under full power. Something violent and expensive and obvious. That's not how the Veyron broke. The W16 was fine. The gearbox was fine. The accumulators Matt had just rebuilt were fine. Monaco was back within reach. Then 2 seconds. The most humbling failures are never the dramatic ones. They're the quiet ones. The ones where a car worth over £1 million refuses to cooperate and nobody can immediately explain why. The ones where the fault doesn't announce itself. It hides behind everything else and waits. This fault was patient, and it was about to make everyone chase it across every system in the car before it finally showed itself. The Veyron is not one machine. It's dozens of machines pretending to be one. Fuel systems, gearbox management, suspension control, traction systems, security architecture. Each one a separate network node. Each one broadcasting and receiving. Each one making real-time decisions based on what the others are reporting. Remove one voice from that conversation, and the whole network starts producing wrong answers. That's what makes diagnosing a car like this so genuinely difficult. The fault you're chasing isn't always producing the symptoms you're seeing. Secondary failures look like primary ones. The car points you toward the wrong rooms. You follow the evidence perfectly and end up somewhere completely useless. Matt followed the evidence perfectly. He ended up somewhere completely useless. Several times. The immobilizer theory made perfect sense. Starts then cuts out. That's what an immobilizer does. The car gets enough signal to fire up, then verifies something it doesn't like and shuts everything down. Matt checked the key coding, checked whether the system had dropped communication, checked every logical branch of that theory. Airtight diagnostic process. Wrong answer. The tracker theory made perfect sense. The fuel pump theory made perfect sense. At one point, the technicians on site were convinced they were dealing with multiple simultaneous faults, which is the diagnostic equivalent of the car screaming in 5 languages at once, and none of them being its native tongue. Here's what was actually happening. One module had gone quiet. One small, unglamorous, inexpensive control unit had stopped broadcasting to the rest of the network. And the rest of the network was panicking in every direction, trying to compensate. The Veyron wasn't broken in 5 places. It was broken in 1 place. But it had convinced everyone otherwise. And it was going to keep doing that until the evidence became impossible to argue with. There's a specific kind of exhaustion that comes with chasing a fault like this. It's not physical, though the work is physical. It's the exhaustion of being wrong correctly, of doing everything right, running the right tests, following the right logic, eliminating the right possibilities, and still arriving at nothing. Experienced technicians standing next to a £1 million car looking at each other, genuinely unsure what to try next. That almost never happens. The people Matt had around him had seen complicated faults before. They'd worked on exotic machinery. They understood how these networks behave when something goes wrong. And the Veyron was still beating them. Because here's the thing about a fault that hides behind secondary symptoms. It doesn't just waste time, it erodes confidence. Every wrong answer makes the next theory feel slightly less certain. Every dead end makes the actual answer feel slightly further away. You start second-guessing diagnostics that should be straightforward. You start wondering whether you're missing something fundamental. Matt wasn't missing anything fundamental. The car was just lying. And it would keep lying until he stopped asking it questions and started removing its ability to answer. Fault codes don't always tell you what's wrong. Sometimes they tell you what's suffering. The fuel pump control module kept appearing. Not occasionally. Repeatedly. Insistently. The same communication failure, the same module, the same fault. Logged again every time the car ran its 2 seconds and shut itself off. Matt disconnected it. Removed it from the network entirely. Not as a fix, as an experiment. Because when everything else has been ruled out, sometimes the only move is to see what changes when you take the suspect off the board. The car changed. Warning lights shifted. Fuel behavior changed. The engine stopped dying after 2 seconds. The network, deprived of the module that had been silently corrupting it, started behaving like a network again. That was confirmation. But what came next was the part of the story nobody anticipated, because Matt went looking for information about that specific module, the fuel tank control unit, and found that Bugatti already had documentation on this exact failure. Recalls, known issues. The manufacturer was aware these units could bring the entire car down. Sit with that for a moment, because it reframes everything that came before it. Every wrong theory, every dismantled body panel, every hour spent chasing an immobilizer that wasn't the problem, a tracker that wasn't the problem, a fuel pump that wasn't the problem. All of that happened because a module failed in a way that Bugatti had already seen before. This wasn't uncharted territory. This wasn't some freak combination of circumstances that nobody could have predicted. There was a documented history, a paper trail, a known failure mode on a known component in a known car. Which raises a question nobody wants to ask out loud, but everyone watching is already asking. If Bugatti knew, if this was documented, recalled, recorded, then why did diagnosing it take this long? Why did it take days of elimination and a disconnection test to arrive at something that already existed in a file somewhere? That question doesn't have a comfortable answer, and it becomes significantly less comfortable when you find out what happened next. So Matt did what any reasonable person would do when they've correctly identified a known fault on a car they spent over £1 million on. He called Bugatti. 2 seconds. That's roughly how long the silence lasted before Matt realized nobody was picking up. He called again. 2 seconds. Nothing. Different department. 2 seconds. Nothing. Different location. Nothing. No voicemail that led anywhere. No callback that materialized. No representative who could confirm a part number or timeline or anything at all. At some point watching this, the car becomes irrelevant. Not because the engineering doesn't matter. Not because the W16 isn't extraordinary. Not because the Veyron's performance legacy isn't real. All of that is true, and none of it matters right now. Because right now, a man who spent over £1 million on a product from this company cannot get anyone from that company to answer a question. Think about what that actually means in practice. You've correctly diagnosed the fault. You know what failed. You know the part number. You know Bugatti has documentation on this exact issue. All you need is someone on the other end of a phone to confirm the replacement part is available and tell you how to get it. That's the entire ask. One conversation. 15 minutes. The phone keeps ringing. And this is the moment where two very different narratives split apart. Because there are people watching this who will say, "It's a used Veyron, buyer beware. These cars are complex, support was never guaranteed." And technically they're not wrong. But technically isn't the point. The point is what Bugatti sells alongside the car, not in the brochure. Nobody writes this in a brochure, but in the cultural mythology of the brand. The implicit promise that exists the moment someone spends this kind of money. You're not just buying engineering, you're buying belonging. You're buying the assurance that the people who built this thing stand behind it. Matt is still waiting for that assurance to pick up the phone. The ownership fantasy is a specific thing. You know the one: private collections, concierge support. The implicit promise that buying at this level means never being left alone with a problem. You're not just buying a car, you're buying into a relationship with the people who built it. Matt is standing in front of a broken Bugatti, phone in hand, discovering that relationship doesn't answer. And the longer you sit with that image, a man who did everything right, diagnosed a known fault correctly, followed every logical step, and still can't get the manufacturer to acknowledge he exists. The more it stops being a story about one car and starts being a story about what exclusivity actually costs. Not the sticker price, not the maintenance bills, not the rebuild budget. The cost of finding out whether any of it was real. 2 seconds is how long the car ran. It's also how long it takes to realize that the most expensive part of this story isn't the module that failed. It's the number that rang out.